Why do people do things in private that they never talk about in public? And what happens when we finally ask why instead of judging? Think about that for a moment. Because when we stop reacting and start asking real questions, we move from gossip to understanding, from shame to science, and from assumptions to truth. One of the biggest mistakes we make when talking about women and sexuality is assuming there must be one shocking reason behind every choice. But human behavior is rarely that simple. As books like Come As You Are remind us, context matters more than stereotypes. Desire does not live in a vacuum. It lives in relationships, emotions, history, and trust. For many women, curiosity is not recklessness. It's learning. It's asking, what do I like? What don't I like? Where are my limits? Curiosity becomes healthy when it's guided by consent and communication, not pressure. When two people can talk openly, explore slowly, and stop at any moment, the experience is less about the act itself and more about feeling safe enough to choose. Trust is another powerful factor. Trust changes how the brain processes intimacy. When a woman feels emotionally secure, the nervous system relaxes. Fear goes down. Openness goes up. This is not about doing something to please someone else. It's about choosing something because the environment feels safe enough to explore. Then there's culture. Media, jokes, whispers, and online conversations all shape expectations, often without us noticing. When something is talked about constantly but never explained honestly, curiosity grows in the dark. Silence doesn't protect people. It just leaves them uninformed. Knowledge, on the other hand, gives people power to decide for themselves. Some women are motivated by novelty. The brain responds to new experiences with attention and excitement. That doesn't mean chasing extremes. It means the mind is wired to notice what's different. In a healthy setting, novelty can strengthen connection rather than replace it. Control also matters. For some, choosing something that is often misunderstood or judged can feel empowering. Making a conscious, informed decision about one's own body can reinforce autonomy. That sense of ownership is deeply tied to confidence and self-respect. But none of this works without clear boundaries. Consent is not a one-time yes. It's ongoing. It can change. It must be respected instantly. When boundaries are honored, intimacy becomes safer, healthier, and more meaningful. The real issue is not why women engage in any specific behavior. The real issue is why we're so uncomfortable talking about choice, agency, and respect. When we replace judgment with curiosity and shame with education, we create space for healthier relationships and healthier minds. So the next time a topic makes people laugh, whisper, or look away, ask yourself this: what would happen if we talked about it with honesty instead of fear? Because understanding doesn't corrupt values. It strengthens them. Curiosity is often misunderstood. People hear the word and think of impulse, recklessness, or a lack of values. But real curiosity is not about losing control. It's about learning. It's the same curiosity that drives people to ask questions about their health, their minds, and their relationships. In intimacy, curiosity shows up as a quiet question inside the brain. What feels right for me? Not what should I do? Not what will make someone stay? But what do I actually want and why? For many women, that curiosity only appears when trust is present. And trust is not automatic. Trust is built through consistency, respect, and emotional safety. When trust is real, the body responds differently. Stress hormones decrease. The nervous system shifts out of defense mode. That shift matters because fear and curiosity cannot fully exist at the same time. When fear is high, exploration shuts down. When safety is high, curiosity is allowed to breathe. This is why assumptions are so dangerous. From the outside, people often assume a woman's choices must be driven by pressure, manipulation, or insecurity. But research and lived experience repeatedly show something different. When women feel heard, not rushed, and not judged, curiosity becomes self-directed. It becomes thoughtful. It becomes intentional. Trust also changes the meaning of the experience. Without trust, any intimate act can feel invasive. With trust, the same act can feel chosen. And the brain is very sensitive to that difference. Choice activates areas of the brain linked to autonomy and reward. Pressure activates areas linked to threat. The behavior may look the same from the outside, but internally, the experience is completely different. Another overlooked part of curiosity is timing. Curiosity doesn't mean always or right now. Sometimes curiosity simply means thinking about something, talking about it, learning about it, and deciding not to do it. That is still curiosity doing its job. A curious mind gathers information before acting. A pressured mind skips that step. Trust allows curiosity to move at the speed of comfort. It allows questions to be asked without fear of punishment. It allows a woman to say maybe, not yet, or no, and still feel valued. When those responses are respected, curiosity remains healthy. When they are ignored, curiosity collapses into silence. And here's the part that rarely gets said out loud. Curiosity doesn't mean liking something. It means being allowed to find out. Sometimes the result is that's not for me. And that outcome is just as important as any other. Trust ensures that the result, whatever it is, will be accepted. When we understand this, the conversation changes. Instead of asking, why would a woman do that? We start asking, was she safe? Was she informed? Was she free to choose? Because curiosity guided by trust is not a problem to explain away. It's a sign of psychological health, agency, and self-knowledge. Communication and emotional safety are the invisible architecture of intimacy. You don't see them, but everything rests on them. Without communication, people guess. Without emotional safety, people perform. And when either is missing, choices stop being authentic and start being survival strategies. Emotional safety begins long before any physical moment. It starts with how disagreements are handled, how no is treated in everyday life, and whether vulnerability is met with patience or punishment. When a woman learns, through repeated experience, that her feelings are taken seriously, her nervous system learns something too. It learns that expression is safe. That lesson changes behavior at a deep level. Communication is not just talking, it's being heard without consequences. Many people can speak, but few feel truly listened to. Real communication allows for uncertainty. It allows someone to say, I don't know yet, without being pushed to decide. It allows questions without ridicule and boundaries without guilt. When those conditions exist, choices become clearer because they are not rushed. In emotionally safe environments, honesty replaces performance. There is less pressure to impress, please, or conform. A woman doesn't have to guess what's expected of her because expectations are discussed openly. That clarity removes fear, and when fear decreases, people make decisions based on values and curiosity rather than obligation. One of the most misunderstood ideas about intimacy is the belief that silence means comfort. Often, silence means uncertainty or fear of rocking the boat. Emotional safety invites dialogue instead of silence. It says, your thoughts matter here. That message alone can change how someone relates to their own desires. Books like Attached and the 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work repeatedly emphasize that secure relationships are built on responsiveness. Responsiveness is the ability to notice, care, and adjust. When a woman feels that her emotional signals are noticed and respected, she is more likely to explore, reflect, and decide freely, not because she must, but because she can. Communication also protects against regret. When people talk through expectations, risks, and feelings beforehand, they reduce the chance of crossing their own boundaries. Emotional safety allows for mid-course correction. Someone can say, this doesn't feel right anymore, and know that the relationship will survive that honesty. Another crucial aspect is aftercare. What happens emotionally after intimacy? Emotional safety doesn't end when the moment does. Feeling respected afterward reinforces the belief that honesty is safe. Feeling dismissed or ignored afterward teaches the opposite. The brain remembers those outcomes and adjusts future choices accordingly. When emotional safety is missing, even consent can feel fragile. A person may technically agree while internally feeling conflicted. Communication brings those conflicts to the surface where they can be addressed rather than buried. Ultimately, Communication and emotional safety don't push people toward any specific behavior. They do something far more important. They give people room to be truthful with themselves. And when someone is free to be truthful, their choices, whatever they are, tend to align with well-being rather than regret. Culture is one of the most powerful teachers we never consciously enroll in. Long before anyone makes a personal decision about intimacy, they have already absorbed thousands of messages about what is normal, desirable, taboo, or expected. These messages don't usually arrive as formal lessons. They come through jokes, movies, social media clips, whispered conversations, and the things people avoid saying out loud. Over time, those fragments form a mental script that quietly influences curiosity and choice. Media plays a major role here. When certain behaviors are repeatedly referenced without context or explanation, they begin to feel bigger, more mysterious, or more extreme than they actually are. Curiosity often grows not because something is inherently appealing, but because it's surrounded by silence and exaggeration. The human brain fills gaps in knowledge with imagination, and imagination is rarely accurate. This is how myths are born. One common myth is that sexual choices must be driven by moral weakness or external pressure. Culture often frames women's sexuality as something acted upon rather than something chosen. That framing matters. When women rarely see honest, nuanced discussions of desire and agency, they may struggle to separate what they genuinely want from what they've been told they should want or should avoid. The confusion doesn't come from curiosity itself. It comes from misinformation. Another cultural force is peer narrative. When people hear repeated stories framed as everyone is doing this or this is what being open-minded looks like, it can create a false sense of normalcy. The brain is highly sensitive to perceived social norms, but perception is not reality. What gets talked about the loudest is not always what happens most often. Understanding this helps explain why curiosity sometimes stems from wanting clarity rather than conformity. Shame is culture's favorite control tool. When topics are labeled as embarrassing or inappropriate to discuss, people are deprived of accurate information. Silence does not erase curiosity. It isolates it. In that isolation, myths thrive. Some women explore not because of recklessness, but because they were never given a safe space to ask honest questions without being judged. Books like The Purity Myth highlight how conflicting cultural messages can create internal tension. On one hand, women are told to be desirable and adventurous. On the other, they are told to be restrained and modest. Holding both messages at once creates confusion. Curiosity becomes a way to resolve that confusion through experience rather than guesswork. It's also important to recognize that culture changes over time. What was once unspeakable becomes discussable. What was once sensational becomes normalized. This shift doesn't mean values are disappearing. It means conversations are evolving. When culture finally allows open discussion, curiosity often spikes, not because people are changing, but because silence is lifting. Understanding the cultural layer doesn't mean blaming culture for individual choices. It means acknowledging context. People don't make decisions in isolation. They make them inside stories they've inherited. When we recognize that, we stop asking, what's wrong with this choice? And start asking, what messages shape this curiosity? And that shift matters, because when myths are replaced with honest conversation, curiosity becomes informed instead of reactive. And informed curiosity leads to decisions that reflect clarity, not confusion. Pleasure, control, and novelty are three psychological forces that shape far more of human behavior than we like to admit. They influence what we eat, how we work, why we travel, and how we connect. In intimacy, these forces don't suddenly disappear. They become more sensitive, more emotional, and more tied to identity. Pleasure is often misunderstood as something shallow or purely physical. In reality, pleasure is deeply connected to the brain. It is shaped by anticipation, relaxation, emotional connection, and meaning. For many women, pleasure is not automatic. It depends on feeling present and unguarded. When the mind feels safe, the body is more responsive. This is why pleasure is rarely about a single act and more about the conditions surrounding it. Control plays a quieter but equally powerful role. Control does not mean dominance over another person. It means agency over one's own experience. Choosing when, how, and whether to engage is a form of self-trust. For some women, making a deliberate choice, especially in an area surrounded by judgment, can reinforce a sense of ownership over their body. That ownership can feel grounding, not rebellious. Psychologically, agency reduces anxiety. When someone feels they are choosing rather than complying, the brain registers autonomy instead of threat. That distinction matters. Autonomy activates motivation and curiosity. Compliance activates vigilance and stress. The same behavior can feel empowering in one context and draining in another, depending entirely on who holds the decision-making power. Novelty is the third piece, and it's rooted in how the brain is wired. The brain is designed to notice what's new. Novel experiences activate attention and learning systems. This doesn't mean people are chasing extremes, it means novelty. Why briefly increases awareness? In healthy relationships, novelty can refresh connection, encourage communication, and prompt reflection. It's not about constant escalation. It's about exploration within comfort and consent. However, novelty without grounding can feel empty. That's why novelty works best when paired with emotional safety and self-knowledge. When curiosity is anchored in awareness, novelty becomes informative rather than overwhelming. It answers questions instead of creating confusion. There is also a reclaiming aspect here. When something has been labeled taboo or misunderstood, choosing it consciously can neutralize fear. Fear loses power when it is examined calmly. That doesn't mean the outcome is always positive. Sometimes exploration confirms a boundary, and that confirmation is valuable. Knowing what doesn't align with you strengthens confidence just as much as knowing what does. Importantly, pleasure, control, and novelty are not obligations. They are influences, not commands. Healthy psychology allows someone to acknowledge these forces without being ruled by them. A woman can recognize curiosity, consider it thoughtfully, and decide against acting on it. That decision is just as valid and just as empowered. When we reduce complex motivations to simple judgments, we miss the real story. The real story is about how humans seek understanding of themselves. Pleasure asks, what feels good to me? Control asks, is this my choice? Novelty asks, what can I learn? None of these questions are reckless. They are reflective. And when those questions are asked honestly, without pressure or shame, they tend to lead not toward chaos, but toward clarity. Consent. And boundaries are not just rules of behavior. They are signals of self-respect and emotional intelligence. They shape how experiences are processed in the mind and remembered in the body. When consent is clear and boundaries are honored, the brain registers safety. When they are ignored or blurred, even subtle discomfort can linger long after the moment has passed. True consent is active, not assumed. It is not the absence of resistance, silence, or hesitation. It is a clear, voluntary choice made with adequate information and without pressure. This matters because the brain responds very differently to choice than it does to obligation. Choice activates calm and curiosity. Obligation activates vigilance. That difference determines whether an experience feels integrated or unsettling. Boundaries are equally important, and they are often misunderstood as barriers. In reality, boundaries are guides. They tell others how to interact respectfully and tell the self what feels aligned. A woman who understands her boundaries is not closed off, she is grounded. Boundaries create the conditions where trust can grow, because expectations are clear and limits are respected. One of the most powerful aspects of healthy consent is the ability to change one's mind. Consent is not a contract. It is an ongoing conversation. Emotional safety depends on knowing that stop, pause, or this doesn't feel right anymore will be honored immediately. When that knowledge exists, anxiety decreases. When it doesn't, people may override their own discomfort to avoid conflict or disappointment. Self-knowledge plays a central role here. Understanding one's own emotional and physical responses takes time and reflection. Many women are taught to prioritize harmony over honesty, which can blur boundaries internally before they ever blur externally. Learning to notice internal signals, tension, hesitation, curiosity, comfort, is part of developing mature consent. Books like The Body Keeps the Score remind us that the body remembers experiences even when the mind tries to minimize them. When boundaries are crossed, even subtly, the body may hold on to that stress. When boundaries are respected, the body learns that expression is safe. Over time, this shapes confidence and trust in oneself. Another overlooked aspect is that boundaries are not static. They evolve with experience, context, and growth. What feels acceptable at one stage of life may not feel right at another. Healthy relationships allow space for that evolution without judgment. They recognize that change is not betrayal, it is development. Consent also includes the freedom to say no without explanation. A woman does not owe a reason for her boundaries. Requiring justification shifts consent from choice to negotiation. When boundaries must be defended, they lose their protective power. Ultimately, consent and boundaries are not about limiting connection. They are about protecting well-being. They ensure that intimacy remains a place of authenticity rather than obligation. When a woman trusts that her boundaries will be honored, she is more likely to be honest with others and with herself. And that honesty is the foundation of any experience that leads to growth rather than regret.